1. We are live again. Okay. Welcome, everybody. Again, this is Ed Gardner, Executive Director of the Global Gun Club. Tonight, we have yet another in a series from Alessandro Padovani. Tonight, he's going to be telling us all about counter-ambush methodology. Was that the actual formal name of the course? Counter-ambush methodology, counter-ambush thinking. If it's what I think it is, and I think it is, it's based on a course that I took, a distance learning course that I took that should be excellent. I have no idea how he's going to cover it in an hour, so I guess we'll see. But without further ado, no, actually, no, that's not true. With a little further ado, because if you have questions, please put them in the chat. We've got several moderators online. We've got myself, Lara Smith, who is the national spokesperson. We got Lonnie Weissman, who you hopefully saw in the excellent Stop the Bleed class last week. Michael Ross, who hopefully you saw in his Introduction to Range Safety class last week. And I've gone ahead and left Paul Cronk on as a co-host and moderator because he's the reason we can hear Al tonight. So you can blame him both for the visuals, but also the audio quality.
Yeah. We'll cherish the audio quality and we'll forgive the visual.
There you go. All right, Al, it is all yours. Please take it away.
All right. Well, thank you again. Welcome, everybody. These things, are getting to be quite fun. I'm looking forward to them. So today is going to be more of a lecture, an interactive kind of class. I'm going to talk a little bit about the counter-ambush methodology and how it differs from traditional training methodology, particularly for the context of self-defense. And so there might be quite a few questions coming in because there is a few things that depart from what is traditionally taught on ranges, whether law enforcement, military, and civilians. And before we go any further, we need to understand that the counter-ambush methodology is not something based on hearsay, anecdotal evidence, or, my uncle that was in the Green Beret that once did this, and so now we have to do this because it's cool. It's actually based on the study of actual aggression, actual events. We need to understand that from when the modern school of firearms that is not really modern anymore started to now, we've had the luxury of being able to look at dashboard camera, security camera, of actual videos of actual events, right? So then we were able to go in and kind of reverse engineer, see what the vast majority of people does, and how can we reverse engineer to figure out what actually did happen and how we can integrate our training into what the body wants to do naturally, right? So it's based on actual, factual evidence, then research. We go back and did research in the physiology, in the psychology of confrontation, performance under stress, and so on and so forth. We see what happens, we see how we can integrate into our training, and then we go back and train in a manner that is more conducive to fighting like the body wants to fight anyway, right? Because before firearm, before anything else, as a species, we have, going through our evolution with a stronger emphasis on survival, right? Our survival instinct is really strong, is really well rehearsed, if you will. And so we're gonna go and integrate that into our training methodology because it makes sense. And we'll see a little bit more clearly why it does make sense. So the counter-ambush training methodology's purpose is really, before we get into tactics or anything else, is to help the student become more efficient in processing information and rapid decision-making while performing complex motor skills under an undue and surprising amount of stress, right? So when we break it down, we see that we need to understand, first and foremost, the context, right? A defensive context that is the worst possible scenario that you find yourself, the dynamic critical incident. We talked about it before. We explained it one more time for people that may not have been able to participate in the previous couple of classes. A dynamic critical incident is an event that is surprising, chaotic, and presents us with a level of threat that we deem necessary to respond to with our fire, right? So there is a couple of points that are really, really, really important there. it's a surprising event, right? It's the ambush. We are out and about, we are choosing which TV to get or where to eat, and all of a sudden there are shots fired, or all of a sudden somebody comes at us, threatens us with a weapon, and so on and so forth, right? So it's surprising because if we knew that something like that were gonna happen, chances are we wouldn't have showed up for it, right? The other important aspect of the surprising thing is when a dangerous stimulus is introduced too quickly to be cognitively analyzed, our brain jumpstarts the body natural reaction. Our brain jumpstarts our default response for something that is threatening and surprising. So what happens there, body natural reaction, we look at them each in a little bit more depth in a minute, but for now, we understand how that works, right? So when we are startled, it's called the startle flinch response, right? When we are startled, we lower our center of gravity, bending the knees, bending the hips, right? We orient toward the threat, both our attention and physically. Hands come up in a protective manner toward the line of stimulus. And those are the external reaction, Internally, there is a change in blood flow, and it allows different parts of the body to have a better capacity for work, right? More blood, more oxygen, more fuel, better capacity, increased capacity for work. So there is an increased acuity to our center field of vision, right? The part of the eye that is, responsible for the center field of vision get more blood flow, so more capacity to focus. There is a distortion in the perception of time. And there is a shunting of blood from the extremities, right? So we all look at each of these one individually and explain both the survival positive and if they have any survival negative that we need to compensate for, right? But we know that a human being facing a threat stimulus that is surprising goes into the startle flinch response, right? There's nobody that, if taken by surprise, can jumpstart the startle flinch and going straight to their response, right? That doesn't happen. It only happens in the mind of people that have a much higher opinion of themselves than, is warranted. So the other important aspect of counter-ambush methodology is the fact that this dynamic critical incident is chaotic, right? We don't know what's going to happen next. I don't know if when I draw my gun and I get into the position to shoot, the bad guy is going to see the gun, get scared, drop his weapon, and run away. Or I don't know if, say, there is multiple threats. If I take care of one threat, I don't know what the second threat is going to do, right? So I cannot guarantee a course of action to be successful. It means that I need to address and respond to each threat at each moment individually. So the fact that it's chaotic should make us understand very clearly how silly it is to prepare for a chaotic event with a choreographed series of drills, right? Most defensive shooting that you see today, unfortunately, is the same as competitive shooting, right? At the beep, you're gonna perform this set of actions, right? 2 rounds here, 2 rounds there, 1 round here, 1 round there, whatever that is. What happens, as you're given the instruction, your brain is starting to figure out what they need to do. It's starting to give the, move blood to the muscle group that need it most, and you're kind of mentally rehearsing your actions, right? So when the beep goes, you already know what to do. It takes away completely information processing. Now, when we are in a self-defense situation, information processing is the paramount, is the most important skill that you can have. Because until I figure out what's happening, if I need to shoot, who do I need to shoot, when do I need to stop shooting, right? That's all information processing, right? And every single dynamic critical incident is going to be different than any other, right? So we need to really understand that choreographed drills may help us developing gun manipulation skills. I may get a little bit smoother at magazine change, at presentation from the holster, things of that nature, right? It does not help me train my most important weapon, which is my brain, right? In this case, it's just a 22, but so very important to understand that. And because then we need to see how we integrate this kind of knowledge in the drills and how we approach it, right? But for now, let's reinforce this thing, right? We need to develop drills that integrate information processing before we decide to shoot in order to be congruent with the situation that we would find ourselves in real life, right? And the other aspect is that this dynamic incident presents us with a level of threat that we deem necessary to respond to with a gun, right? So for our intended purposes, we're not talking and we're not training de-escalation, avoidance, and all that stuff, right? We take it the 3 seconds, right? Or the few seconds between the moment that I realize I need to shoot and the moment that I'm shooting, right? So that is the context of the counter-ambush training. And the training that we do, all the drills that we do are aimed at making us more efficient in responding to such an event. The caveat to this is that if you can prepare yourself for the worst case scenario, the attack that you don't see coming, right? If you see the attack coming, like if you realize that the bad guy is crossing the street and is going in to come out with a weapon, my counter-ambush training is not detrimental to that situation. When I see it, I already know what to do, right? I'm processing information a little bit sooner because I was able to see the threat sooner, right? But shooting stance and everything else still work the same way when I see the threat coming as when I don't see the threat coming, I'm taken by surprise, right? So one is not detrimental. While the choreographed training, the training where you always pretend to be in control, you're always ready, you always see the bad guy coming, so you already always know what to do. Once the bad guy takes you by surprise, all that training goes out the window, right? Because now there is a reactionary gap that is even bigger than normal because you don't know what the heck you're gonna do because you did not prepare yourself for that scenario. You only prepare for yourself from, oh yeah, I know what's happening, I know what I need to do, and I'm doing it, right? So that's the context. Let's look a little bit more in depth at the body natural reaction. Lower center of gravity, right? And I'm gonna do it just for everybody that may not have been here the other classes. So when we lower center of gravity, when we are spooked, like, oh, we lower center of gravity, and these things happen at the same time. Obviously, we break them up to talk about them each individually. But right, you know, I'm here. So my lower center of gravity, hands, knees are down, and I bend at the hips, right? So this is center of gravity. The survival positive of this is that now we are better prepared to either fight or flight, right? Our brain gets our body ready for movement, right? Whether it is fighting movement or running away, now we can do it because nobody can run away with their hips locked and their knees locked, right? I mean, it doesn't look very tactical. Now, how do we integrate that into a training is that if you look at this, and just so we know, right? Gun is empty, there is a block in here. But when I recognize that danger, right, and now I go for my gun and move laterally, that lower center of gravity, right, allows me to have all my body on top of being locked out on the skeletal system. I got all my muscle engaged. I also have my body mass right behind the gun, right? And this is just the lower center of gravity turned into a shooting stance because it is more efficient. The other thing that we notice is that we orient toward the threat, meaning that first is going to be a tension, right? I'm going to kill you, or I see something, I hear something, then I'm going to turn towards that threat. Given enough time, right, my body will square off and turn into the threat as well, because obviously hips and shoulder to the threat, I'm going to be stronger in fighting it back if I need to fight it back, right? I don't want to be defiled or bladed out, right? The more bladed I am, the less stable I am, and so it's not going to be really beneficial. Now, if we know that we're going to orient toward the threat, we integrate that into our training by utilizing it for multiple threat engagement. Your traditional way to train multiple threat is like, you know, the free target or the play rack, right? People go bing, 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 bing. Now, if you think about it critically, right? And we talked about it briefly, right? I got 5 people, right? All there. If I start to engage one, do we know for a fact that all the other 4 are going to stay there exactly where they were? Probably not. They're going to react to me as much as I'm reacting to them, right? So this like, oh, I know where the threats are because my drill instructor told me you're going to go A, B, C. Now I'm going to go A, B, C. That's choreographed and it really takes away any information processes, right? If we were to take that verbatim and apply it in real life, I got 3 people, I shoot the first one, I shoot the second one, I shoot the third one. What happened? First one was a legit shoot. The second one, I turned around, was running away because he saw me shooting, so now he got 5 rounds in the back. Not very justifiable. The third guy ran away, and my shots that went where he was before now travel like, 100 yards to a house and takes out an innocent person, right? So we need to understand that. That doesn't make sense to train multiple threats like that. The way that we train multiple threats is we engage the first threat that we recognize, right? And the instructor is going to give you one command. You're going to draw, you're going to engage, and then you're going to come back and assess, and that's when you're going to get the second command, and you can move lateral again, engage and assess. You may get a third command, move lateral again, engage and assess. This orientation, right, prevents me from having to be out here and swinging the gun, because especially under stress, I may swing over travel and have to fix it, right? Here, as I recognize the threat, if you guys are my threat, I recognize it, I'm gonna square off to you, right? And so I just need to punch the gun out instead of having the gun travel all different ways. Again, in real life, right? If I'm engaging the first threat here, and as I'm coming back, I recognize the second threat, I don't need to come all the way back just to punch out. Again, from here, orient, punch out, orient, punch out. So it gives me more true to what happens in reality. I need to each individual threat before I address it, even in the context of multiple threats. And physiologically, it helps me, not swing from one target to the other. It helps me to like be more efficient in my presentation, right? So that was the orienting part. Hands come up in a protective manner toward the line of stimulus, meaning that if the line of stimulus is somebody in front of me coming with a haymaker, right? This is going to be my flinch response, right? If it's a dog coming around the corner, this is going to be my flinch response. So towards the line of stimulus, but it's always between you, command center, core, and the threat, right? So how we integrate this? We integrate it because we know that if you're startled, right, this is going to be our reaction. So now before we go for the draw, we're going to act out a flinch, then going for a gun so that we can strengthen the connection between the stimulus of, oh shit, there is danger, and the alert response of moving laterally as I go for my gun, right? So that's how we integrate the external natural reaction into our training. Now on the internal, we see the first and foremost is the increased acuity to the center field of vision. This is commonly referred to as tunnel vision, and commonly tunnel vision as a negative, a negative connotation, because people think that tunnel vision, right, you lose peripheral. It doesn't really work like that. It's not that you lose peripheral vision, but you have an increased capacity for work in the part of the eye that focuses on the center field of vision, right? And this is because, again, we are startled by a danger. The brain wants to figure out as much information about that danger as soon as possible so they can look for the most appropriate response, right? That's why there is an intent focus, right? So we know that that's what's going to happen. We integrate that into our training by not relying on the front side unless we need a higher degree of precision, but relying on a kinesthetic alignment. So I push the gun in and parallel with my line of sight, so that when I'm focused on, which in this case is going to be the threat, my gun is in and parallel with the line of sight, so the muzzle is pointed at that threat. If I have good trigger press, now I can achieve combat accurate hits without having to slow myself down and look for the side when I don't need them, right? What I mean by slowing ourselves down, because we know that when we are on the square range and we practice, we train, there is nothing more important than the front side, right? You can always pick up the front side first, right? Front side, front side, front side. The problem in real life, and this is born of feedback from people that have been in, in shootout and so on and so forth, that train a certain way and they realize, oh, I didn't even see my front side. Like, so what happens is, by achieving good kinesthetic alignment, I'm working with what the body wants to do, right? I'm here, focus on the bad guy, both eyes open, good trigger press, and I engage the bad guy, and I can achieve combat accurate hits. If you were to rely on your front sight, what would happen in real life is, oh shit, I'm focused on the threat, and now I have to take that focus away to focus on a piece of metal that is like 2 feet in front of me that my brain doesn't really care about, and that's why I would be slowing myself down, right? I don't want to work at cross purposes with what my brain and my body wants to do in that situation. Obviously, caveat, if the bad guy is far away, if the bad guy is behind cover, if the bad guy has an hostage, right? What that means is that the target dictates a higher degree of precision. In this case, I have to slow down and I have to use my resources to mitigate deviation so that I can be sure of my shot and where it's gonna go, right? So in this case, I need to slow down, I need to close one eye, I need to align the sights, right? I need to take all the steps that I need in order to get that shot. And your own balance of speed and precision, right, that we develop through drilling, through drills, that's what informs you whether you can go kinesthetic, alignment only, or you can go intuitive side of fire, right? It's an individual trait, so it's going to be different from me, from you, from anybody here, right? We need to train so that we can develop a recognition of what we need to do intuitively for ourselves, given the level of skills that we are at, right? There is a survival disadvantage, if you will, for the increased acuity of center field of vision. That disadvantage is the fact that it limits my perception of the peripheral. And so I need to make a bigger effort in breaking that focus once the threat is stopped, so that I can go into my assessment and look for other threat, other people that I don't want to get shot with by, you know, law enforcement and CCW people, people that need my help, position of advantage, all of those things, right? So what happens is, one of the things that we integrate into the training is like after we finish our shooting engagement, right? We want to break that full extension, come back into the high compressed rate to assess. And hopefully that impetus will distract us from that being focused on the threat that is down and bleeding that we just shot. Because remember, now it's not just a physiological focus, right? Now it's an emotional focus. Now you just shot somebody 4 or 5 times, they're bleeding out, you just did that. Chances are you're gonna be pretty locked into that, right? So hopefully breaking that to come in for the assessment will help us to actually give us the impetus to start looking around instead of being completely locked into that threat that we were able to stop, luckily, right? So we need to be very cognizant of that. Now, the second internal reaction, that distortion the perception of time, right? What does that mean is that basically the part of the brain that processes the visual information gets more blood, higher capacity for work, so it can process information faster. The part of the brain that analyzes information doesn't have a significant increase in blood flow, so it doesn't have a significant increase in capacity for work, and so it's gonna process the information at the same speed as before. Just to give you an example, right? Let's say I have a video camera that processes 30 frames per second, right? It takes 30 frames per second. The editor thinks that every 30 frames is 1 second, right? Now, because we're under stress, we got more blood, more capacity for processing. I process 60 frames per second, but the editor doesn't know that changed, so it feels like it's 2 seconds instead of 1, you know? So there is a distortion in the perception of time, and the survival positive of that is that it gives us the opportunity to make better decisions because we can see what's happening with more clarity, in more detail, if you will. Obviously, we don't have more time, but it feels like it. And I don't know if anybody's been in a defensive situation or in a car crash, right? Even in a car crash, once you realize that crap, you're not going to be able to stop in time, you get so focused on what's in front of you, and it takes like 5 minutes to hit the car in front of you, right? When it's really literally seconds. So we need to understand that for a couple of reasons, right? One, the survival positive may give us a perception of figuring things out. We can capture more information in the same amount of time, so the brain can make better decisions. The survival negative, though, is that if you think about it, let's say I'm doing a reload, right? And normally my reload is 2 seconds, right? Now, as I'm doing my reload, looking at the gun, with the distortion, the tachypsychia is called, like it's going to be technical and so on. With this distortion in the perception of time, we see that 80, 90% of the time seems to slow down, right? So what happened? I'm doing my reload, and now I'm thinking I'm going slow, so I want to rush it, and when I rush it, I may fumble it, right? It's a little bit like, you know, for anybody that remembers, you know, landlines, you know, and you were waiting for somebody to call you back to see if you were going on the date on Friday or not. Coming back from work, normally you can, you know, without looking, you can put the key back in the door, you know, unlock it and come in. If the phone is ringing, ring, now you're like rushing it, and you cannot do it as well because you're going faster than your skills allow, right? So this informs us on another thing, that it would behoove us to be able to manipulate the gun, do reloads, and do malfunction clearing, drawing, and so on, without having to look at the gun, right? It takes away the risk of wanting to rush it, and we also have more significant things to be looking at rather than the gun during a shootout, right? EA, the bad guy, the environment, and so on. Thirdly, we have that shunting of blood from the extremities, right? So there is less blood from here, you know, here goes to where is needed more. And the survival positive is that, you know, we all hear about defensive wounds and so on. That's what happens. You're flinching and you get hit, wounded, cut over here. So you have a lesser opportunity to bleed out, because with less blood, you know, it's going to take longer for you to lose a significant amount of blood, right? So that's the survival positive. The survival negative that we need to take into consideration is that with the shunting of blood from the extremity, we lose dexterity, right? So it would be like, you know, again, doing something dexterous in the wintertime when you forgot your gloves, right? Less blood here, less ability. Excuse me. How we integrate that into the training is by trying to rely as much as possible on gross motor skills. We don't lose fine motor skills during a stressful situation, right? But our capacity to perform finer motor skills is diminished. So it makes sense to rely on them the least amount possible, right? What I mean by that, trigger press, fine motor skill. Mag release, fine motor skill, right? Rack the slide instead of going for the slide lock. Now we rely the least amount possible. We cannot change trigger press. We cannot change mag release, right? So we are stuck with those. But anything else?
Excuse me, Al, yes. There was a question about the technical term that you used, the word for the medical term for the response.
The distortion, the perception of time is tachypsychia.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. And we see there, like, you know, some people will say, oh man, everything went so fast, I don't know what happened. Most people will say, oh man, everything slowed down. It was like, it took forever, right? That's why, you know, when guys tell story, oh, we were in a fist fight for like 5 minutes. Yeah, no, not really, not really. But so it's an important thing to figure out.
You need to say that again a little slower. There you go. Got it. Thank you, Laura.
Thank you. So there is another external natural reaction that we talk about. We don't necessarily integrate it in training and so on, but it's something to be cognizant. We do actually integrate in the training, and I'll explain how. But we have a grasp reflex, right? So we've noticed that if we are holding something in our hands and something startling happens, we have a tendency to clamp down, grasp harder what we have in our hands, right? There's a couple of hypotheses about it. You know, first, like, you know, you're a kid with your mom, so something happens, you ain't gone to your mom. Like if you're a monkey, you ain't gone to your mom, or you ain't gone to a tree. You know, if you're a hunter-gatherer, right, you just killed a rabbit, you grab the rabbit, saber-toothed tiger comes. I don't know if the timeline on those things is correct, but just as an example. You know, now you don't want to drop it and run away. You want to keep your resources as much as possible, right? So whatever the actual reason is, we know that that's something that happens, right? So we integrate that into our training by keeping the finger somewhere other than the trigger until we're ready to shoot, preferably on the seam between the slide and the frame. So again, there is the empty gun, right? So if I keep my finger here, right, and I get startled, oh my God, I can still access my trigger, right? Starting, it's a grasp, I want to clamp down, so this finger comes back. If it's up here, I got a tactile feedback and so on. Even if I have the same grasp reflex, it's going to have a much harder time accessing that trigger, right? And that's why we stress that position in training. All right. Any questions so far?
Go, go, go.
All right. Da-da-da-da.
You're supposed to stroke the beard when you're looking at your nose.
Oh yeah, oh yeah, yeah, yeah. Just checking. I covered everything over there so far.
One question. Eve had a question about your holster. Your appendix carry holster.
Yeah.
Could you tell her what that is?
Sure. So let me just. I don't want to. There's a whole bunch of holsters for appendix. This is a LAG, like a glove, LAG Tactical Kydex, JM Kydex, Folster. They do really good ones as well. But basically, you know, it's got a couple of things, you know, to make it more comfortable and to make it conceal better, right? So we got a foam wedge on the inside, and this helps to keep the top of the gun inside, right? So if I'm here with this foam wedge, it helps to keep the top in. Then it's got a wing over here, right? And this wing it's under the belt, so it cinches, it helps to keep this corner in, right? So both things help you with concealment, and this one helps you with comfort. Then, you know, whatever you prefer for clips, right? You can get soft loops, you can get, you know, hard clips. And like, if you see these clips, right? These are actually two different clips that I'm trying out. This one is way more secure. Like if you see the little lip here, where is it? Little lip there, that hooks under the belt, so you know the holster stays in place. This one doesn't have one that is as, you know, as sharp, if you will, but it still works pretty well, right? But this would be the clip to go if you want metal clips. And then another thing that helps is you have the covering the whole slide. It just helps when you're sweating and so on and so forth. You know, you don't rust the gun as much. Like I said, I can, you know, holsters are very, very personal. You know, like this works well for me. It doesn't come with the foam wedge, so I added that. But you know, you put a little Velcro back in and so on, and that's good to go. Incidentally, while we are at it, this is like my most favorite mag carrier. It's Stealth Gear USA, and the peculiarity is that there is this backing. So I don't know, you can't say, but this is perforated. It's very comfortable. It lets it breathe really well, and you know you can fit it wherever you want on your belt. So you know, Stealth Gear US for mag carrier, you can't beat them. All right.
One more question for you.
Yeah.
In a surprise situation, how do you slow down and calm your mind? Is it physical that drives psychological, or vice versa?
It's always the mind that navigates the body, right? So one way to slow it down, one way to keep it, you know, the analogy is like the eye of the storm, right? No matter what goes on around you, you should always be calmer than what goes on around you, right? Because again, we understand that information process is the most important thing, right? If you start to spin out, you're not going to be able to process information, you're not going to be able to perform, and you may be able to perform and hit the wrong person because your mind is not really processing information correctly. So there is really very little that helps apart from force-on-force training, right? Putting yourself in a situation that are as close to reality as possible while remaining safe, and that will give you a legitimate training for your brain, for your emotions, because when we do force-on-force scenario, if they're well developed, you need to have a script of the scenario. The instructor needs to script the scenario to the goal that he wants to elicit in the student. You have to have role players that are trained to bring the students to where they want it, right? And so what happens is that when the scenarios are run professionally, your cognitive brain knows that you're there to train, but the limbic system, which is the part of the brain that is in charge of your survival instinct, recognizing danger and so on and so forth, the limbic system doesn't have the luxury to differentiate between a real bad guy and a role player bad guy. If the role player gives cues of behavior that are congruent with a threatening behavior from a legit bad guy, your brain is gonna go right into the adrenal response, fight or flight, and so on and so forth. So now you're learning to feel it, you're learning to manage it in training, you're making all the mistakes that you need to make in training so that you don't make them in real life, right? Because when you run through scenarios, you need to be run through each individual scenario until you're successful on your own. Now you have developed a memory of the successful resolution of that scenario, which will be stored in your long-term memory. And if you find yourself in a same situation, you replicate that response. If you find yourself in a similar situation, you're gonna adapt, you're gonna adapt that learned response to the new situation, which is still faster than having to come up with a brand new response on the spot, right? So the best training for your mind, for your mindset, is through force-on-force training. And incidentally, we're gonna start to offer it through the Liberal Gun Club soon enough, after we can all get together and train again. Any other questions?
Onward.
All right. So now, since we're talking about skills and skill development, let's talk about intuitive skills. And there's a little bit of a misunderstanding in the gun community, between instinctive and intuitive. Like instinctive is automatic. Like an instinctive response is a response that is automatic. So the brain bypasses any cognitive to go to that, right? So we cannot train ourselves out of an instinctual response. Like the lower center of gravity, for instance, when you get startled, right? Nobody can train themselves out of that. You have one lifetime to train outside of something that your brain has developed through millennia of evolution, right? So good luck with that, right? The only people that don't flinch in front of danger are either liars or people that are exposed to that sort of danger often and frequently enough so that they can recognize it as it happening. So they have a slighter flinch, it doesn't go away, right? We call it micro flinch. Like you may just have a little tremor, but that's kind of the same thing. From there, your brain jumpstart and look for the response and so on. So the more you practice to respond to certain stimuli, the better you become at it, right? So it's really important because what we develop in our shooting, the intuitive shooting, intuitive defensive shooting program, are intuitive skills. They're not automatic. You still need to process information, right? Because if you develop a skill that is automatic, we know that we have false positive, right? And so if every time I perceive danger, automatically I shoot, and now that's a false positive. Instead of a bad guy coming around the corner was, my cousin, my friend, a passerby, that wouldn't behoove us, right? So we need to process information before we decide to press the trigger every single time. Intuitive means skills that work well with what the body wants to do naturally, right? And that's the basis of what we teach, right? Shooting stance. The body wants to lower center of gravity. Incidentally, that's a beautiful shooting stance. We integrate that, and so on and so forth, as we have talked about. So this is a little caveat, a little clarification to go into the skill development cycle, right? How do we develop defensive shooting skills, right? So we need to understand that it behooves us to learn the skills in as much context as possible, where the limits are safety and complexity, right? As much context as possible would be people shooting back at you, right? Now, the safety of that is not really there. Remember, it's the instructor responsibility to evaluate every drill and make sure that the benefit of that drill far outweighed any perceived or known dangers, right? Risks. So the risk of having somebody being there shooting back at you really, outweigh any benefit that you would have from that drill, right? So we need to put it in context, though. So how do we put it in context? in the intuitive defensive shooting, we don't choreograph drills. You always have to have your brain switched on and decide for yourself who you need to shoot, right? So when we start, after we work through the fundamentals, right, after the first hour and a half, we now integrate different commands that you need to process and respond to. So it might be a number, it may be a high center chest, it may be a box, it may be a different target, right? So that's how we integrate, the realism into that. We need to have the student process information prior to decide where the target, the threat that they need to engage is. Complexity. We know that, one of the more complex skills that we practice is a presentation from the holster, right? So now when we do presentation from the holster, we break it down, right? We go step by step, which is not contextualized for real life, but we limit the danger by making it step by step. And when we know that everybody can do it safely, now we get back to doing it on the one command. We integrate lateral movement again, and so on and so forth, right? Then we practice, once we learn a set of skills, we practice those skills in as much context as possible. And here the limiting factor is the plausibility principle. The plausibility principle simply states that given that everybody has limited resources to train, right, whether it is money, time, or whatever, right, it behooves us to train and focus our training to the probable and then opening up to the plausible, because nobody can train for the possible. Like, everything is possible, right? Everything can be possible. We don't have the resource to train for all of that. So now everybody needs to figure out their own lifestyle, what they do for a job, where they live, and so on and so forth, and figure out, where they might be more vulnerable, right? And then train for that. Train for what can probably happen to you, right? A mugging, ATM, ninjas attacking you, probably not, right? Is it possible? Yeah, but not probable. Once we have trained for the most probable scenario that we may encounter, if we still have some resources left, we can then expand to the plausible, something that is less likely, but could plausibly happen to you, right? So that's why the drills need to be congruent with that kind of training, right? So when we do drills, when we do, multiple threads and so on and so forth, they're all predicated on the plausibility principle, right? After we practice those skills, now we need to evaluate them. We need to evaluate our ability to apply those skills in a simulation, right? Simulation can be a very simple simulation like a figure-8 drill, or it can be a very complex force-on-force exercise, right? But simulation training basically exposes the student to a level of stress that they can overcome with the skills that they've learned, right? If they're successful, they go through the simulation, through the scenario, and they're successful. Now we can expand the context of the plausibility, or we can expand the skill set, right? But if you're going through the simulation and we fail, now the simulation informs us to where we need to go back and go back to the learning or maybe the practicing, right? So the skill development cycle is a cycle because we are learning things in context, we practice them in context, we evaluate them, right? Where we fail in evaluation, we go back to practicing or to learning if we misunderstood something, right? Where we succeed in the simulation, now we go back to learning new skills or a new context, then practice and evaluate, and so on and so forth, right? So this allows us to maintain integrity in our training methodology and progress when we are ready, rather than arbitrarily, because now, oh, we need to do this set of drills because, these are the more advanced drills or whatever, right? There is really only basic skills applied to advanced situation, right? To more complex situation, there is not advanced skills in defensive shooting. All right, so this brings us to the warrior expert theory that states that through frequent and realistic training, one can learn to use the power of recognition to respond more efficiently to a dynamic critical incident. What does that mean? We need to look at our brain the brain solves problems, right? There's many different ways. For our context, we are going to look at 3 particular ways. Like, one is trial and error. So we are presented with a problem. We try A, doesn't work. We try B, doesn't work. We try C, works. Oh, cool, C. Obviously, we don't have the luxury to apply trial and error during a dynamic critical incident, right? So let's look at another couple of ways the brain uses to solve problems. One is by reproductive means, which we touched on a little bit earlier, right? I have a problem. I find a solution. That solution, because it was positive, has a positive emotional value attached to it. I store it in my long-term memory bank. And when I find myself in front of the same scenario, the positive emotional value that I attached to it helps me to recollect that appropriate response quicker. So I can get to my response without having to analyze the situation cognitively, just by recognizing, hey, I've seen this, I have a response for this, I apply the same exact response. Then we solve problem by analogical means. What it means is that we find a scenario that is very similar to what we saw, but not exactly the same. We go look for that response, and we modify it on the fly to fit this scenario, which again, it's quicker than having to analyze a brand new scenario and come up with an appropriate response for that. So the more training we do, the more realistic it is, right? So it can be, training at the range where there is, information processing prior to engaging the threat. It can be simulation, it can be force on force. But the more scenarios we are exposed to and we successfully resolve, the wider the capacity for the brain to solve problems is going to be in real life, right? And again, by training frequently and realistically, we're going to use recognition, which is basically cognition, like knowing something without a cognitive process, if you will, without analytical process, to be a little bit more specific. And I'm sure that there is some a professional here that may have something to that if I twist my tongue when I'm talking about this stuff. But so that is important because, again, in order for a training to be realistic, you need to understand that it needs, if you're training for defensive purposes, it needs to be counter-ambush methodology, right? If you're training for competition, that's a different context, right? Go ahead. If you're training for extreme precision, that's a different context. Go ahead. Remember, like, in training, there is this fake focus on extreme accuracy, right? If I have a group this big in somebody's chest, right, in a threat's chest, right, it's not better than a group like this that's going to be quicker, right? The more precision I apply, the more time I need. So the goal is to stop the threat with the least amount of time, effort, and energy, right? So a smaller group than what I have available on the target is not better. It actually slows us down, right? So we need to focus on that, the intuitive, the defensive accuracy and all those concepts, right? But when the training is realistic and frequent, that prepares us for, to respond to a lot more scenario, more different scenario situation. And again, the more I feel confident about responding to, more scenarios, the more chance I have to be able to maintain a level of calmness when something like that has happened, right? And I mean a level of calmness, not calmness per se. But it's really important to understand that you cannot rush under this situation, like you want to err on the side of caution, even under this kind of stress, right? Because you need to think your response before you can apply it, right? If you're improvising, if you're flailing like that, that's, if you're lucky, good, but we can't count on luck, right? Incidentally, the prior version of the warrior expert theory is kind of emblematic as well. It stated that the importance of drawing fast and shooting straight is not as drawing fast and shooting straight is not as important as being able to recognize a threat as soon as possible and respond to that threat with what you have at your disposal, right? So again, that focus on the mechanics rather than the thinking is detrimental to defensive shooting. All right, any questions so far?
No, I think we're good.
I was going to
All
ask,
right.
you know, this is that I was going to ask the question that did come up. There's a lot of talk around airsoft and that sort of mechanical replacement for firearms or munitions as a potential training aid for force on force. And want to opine on that for a moment?
Absolutely. So, like I said, you know, the most important part of a force on force scenario is not the equipment that you use, but is the storyline, right? The storyline and the role players. Because with the storyline and with the role player, I can get a student invested emotionally in what's happening, even if I'm holding my fingers, even if I'm holding a banana instead of a gun, right? Because it's how the role player interacts that brings up the realism, right? Obviously, sim guns bring the most level of realism, right? So they are they give us some advantages. But a airsoft gun, particularly if it's a reciprocating slide airsoft, right, does the same thing, right? Because again, when I'm using it, there is a reciprocation, so I need to kind of like, you know, I get that feeling of managing recoil, if you will. There is that noise, right? And the bullet coming out or not, whether you want to use it or not. Because again, remember the force on force, a lot of people are running like, you know, pain compliance, right? People don't want to get shot, so that's why it works. No, because when you only leave it to, I don't want to get shot in the leg by the sim gun, right? Then you see people behaving like they wouldn't behave in real life. You know, they put the hand around the corner and start shooting, or they're like, you know, they're shooting like this, or whatever, right? So it doesn't really become realistic. So the way that force on force works is by having the student getting emotionally invested in the scenario, so that his limbic system respond like it would be in real life, and that's when we expose the area of improvement, where we figure out what they can do and what they need to work on. So airsoft guns work beautifully. Even blue guns, right? You know, because it's the energy that you put behind that gun that really is going to make the change, right? By the same token, you know, maybe you have the bad guy have a fake hammer or a fake stick or a fake knife, because again, it's that threat stimulus that elicits the limbic response from the student, right? And the student may have the software. So, yeah. Would that be sufficient?
Yep, and just that they don't suck. It was good. I just
Yeah,
want to
no,
do a
absolutely.
quick time check here. You got 4 minutes till the top of the hour. You want to go for how much longer do you think?
If there is question, forever. Well, let's address something.
Your material. Look at your slides. Come on, look at you.
Dude, I don't have material. Like it's all here except for like, you know, some points over there that so I don't forget. But we can go on forever. Like, let me address a couple of things that incidentally go into the into the counter ambush methodology. Right? There was a discussion about Israeli carry today or yesterday, whatever, you know, on the forum, right, on the Facebook. And again, like Israeli carry was developed at a specific time for all the reasons that smarter people than me, you know, pointed out. You know, there wasn't, you know, they didn't have the same guns. You know, they didn't have good training. The guns weren't good. Blah blah blah. And it was just for the police force, right? Nowadays, like Israeli special forces carry it around in the chamber, and they laugh at you if you say different. There is a little caveat there. Former Israeli special forces that need to sell Israeli defensive shooting, they may tell you whatever you want to hear, right? But when you talk to special forces that are current or just retired, and they laugh at the fact that, you know, people want to carry without a round in the chamber, because the only reason to carry without a round in the chamber is because you're not confident either in your equipment, so change it, or in your skills, so train more. Because remember, under stress, not just the remembering to rack the slide that is very difficult, right? But actually having to do it, because yeah, everybody can do it, you know, blah, blah, blah. But what happens if I'm punching you in the face? Now you need to defend yourself, and you cannot, you know, use two hands to rack the slide. So now you need to rack in your belt, you need to rack it this, that, the next thing, right? But not carrying one in the chamber just sets you up for failure, right? If you're not comfortable carrying around in the chamber, get a better holster that protects your trigger guard so that nothing can happen to the gun. The gun is not going to shoot by itself, right? Train more. Become confident with the gun that you're carrying. Because remember, you're carrying a gun in case you need to defend yourself or a loved one. Freaking invest the time to get better at it. You know, don't like, oh, I'm carrying, but you know, I don't have it in the chamber because it's safer. It's not safer. It's gonna get you. You know, it's gonna have a much higher chance to getting you killed rather than not. Right. So there are plenty of justification. None of them are valid.
You can throw your hat now.
I'm gonna, you know, I like this hat, so you know.
We do have one more question after you're done.
Yes, please.
So Israeli carry bad.
Yeah.
The other question: a friend of a friend was an air marshal, criticized the locked elbow form for pistol shooting. Quote unquote, makes it harder for the bad guy to. He advocated bending your elbows, so you know the bent elbows versus the locked elbows from a stance perspective.
Why?
Because he said, let's see if I can read this again. It's better to keep the elbows bent to hold the weapon closer to you. Makes it harder for the bad guy to take your weapon, especially in CQB. And this was specific to an air marshal.
All right.
To a
so
question.
There's still the empty gun, right? Let's check this out. This is my ready position, like compressed ready position. Let's say that for whatever reason, you know, you know, I just engaged somebody, right? And now I need to go to a position of advantage, but I don't know, there might be more threats around, right? This public space. So this is how I'm going around, right? My high compressed ready, because something that's pretty fast to engage, or I can engage from here too if somebody is on top of me, right? But when I'm shooting at somebody, right, whether my elbows are locked or whether my elbows are bent like this, the difference is like 3 inches. You know, so if the bad guy can grab my gun there, the bad guy can grab the gun here, right? So it's pretty silly because here it's going to be harder to control recoil. Here I'm locked in, so I got my skeletal structure that helps me to manage recoil, as well as my muscular structure, as well as my stance forward, right? So my mass. So this thing, even if it's here, right? We've seen the center. Oh man, between. If I have to talk about Israeli carry and center axis relock on the same day, I'm gonna lose hair, all right? But just in case the air marshal was talking about the center axis relock, which is like a slightly silly things to carry the gun like this. And incidentally, it's in all the police TV show, they're all going around like this, right? Because it looks cool. But it's so devoid of any legitimate advantages on the physiology, on the psychology, and everything else that I don't even want to talk about it, right? So let's keep it here. So from here to there, we are not stopping the bad guy from grabbing our gun if he wants, right? And frankly, if a bad guy is within 2 arm reach, right? So when he can grab my gun, I'm not gonna go to full extension, right? I'm gonna shoot from retention, right? And I'm gonna be, if I'm in fight and so on, I'm gonna shoot for retention. If somebody is where the, you know, within 2 arm reach, so if you, the computer camera, are the bad guy, I'm not gonna go out here to shoot you. I'm gonna shoot you from here, I'm gonna shoot you from here, I'm gonna step laterally, gain space, and extend. That work as an explanation?
It did, and I think the upshot there was it's pretty silly.
That's all right.
Yeah, you got a big thank you for that one, Al.
Yeah, it was a big
you're very welcome. You're very welcome. And again,
quote unquote,
like,
makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Like, unfortunately, right? Up until 10 years ago, 15 years ago, right? Most training was based on anecdotal evidence. Oh, that happened to me, so now I'm going to integrate in my program, right? But there was not actually no research, no background, no critical thinking about it, right? So any question you have, ask it, because again, better knowledge only displays worse knowledge, right? And sometimes our program has evolved by question that the student asks, and we have to go back and think about it, and then like, oh, you know what? Let's look at this, look at that, get some more research, adapt the program. So question make the program better, right? right? And dispel any doubt that we may have. Any other questions?
I don't want to do too much in the shooting stuff because folks can go back to the defensive shooting and the home defense carbine thing, because you covered a lot of stuff around stance there, including shooting from multiple stances. I think you did a really good job of covering 10 or 11 hours of material in an hour and about an hour. Because I've taken the counter ambush class, and that's a long time of listening to Rob. But it's totally worth it if it's even still available anymore. So this is I think this was really good. Anybody else have any questions? We got them for a few more minutes.
There's one more in there that just came in. So the question is, how do you train these techniques without a trainer present? In other words, how do we work on these skills when we are practicing on our own?
Yeah, so basically, I don't know if you're all familiar with the balance of speed and precision target, right? That's the IC company one, and basically the advantage of that is it's got a bottle shape silhouette. It's got 6 numbers on the side with different colors, right? It's got a headshot area, a chest shot area, and 2 boxes that are the same size as the chest shot area, right? What we call defensive accurate area. So, and it's got an A box and a B box, right? So now you have A, B, you have high center chest, you have headshot, you have 6 numbers, you have 3 different colors, right? So the easiest way to do it, if you can, there is an app that only works on Apple phones, IC training app, where Rob gives different.
It doesn't work anymore. Did he get it fixed?
I'm not sure. So the other thing is that you can record it on do recording on your phone, right? Of numbers, box, of different commands, and then put it on shuffle on your earphone. So now you're listening to your own commands shuffled up. So now you need to respond to each command. So make sure that you leave, when you record it, you leave like 10 seconds per command so you can perform what you need to perform, come back, assess, and then be ready to go again, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah, for what it's worth, 2 things. 1, the app stopped working like a year and a half, 2 years ago.
All right.
2, the club has been working with a developer to try to recreate it. And it's my fault that it's not done yet. Because we need voiceovers. I'm thinking that we either get you or HK to record the voiceovers for the up commands and the numerical commands and the addition and subtraction thing. If you haven't read or seen some of the stuff on these drills, they are available on other channels. We can post links to that. And during our defensive shooting class, we do go over some of those drills where somebody's calling those targets, and I put a link to it, but apparently you can't click links anymore. I put a link to the picture of the target so you can see what it is. We'll make sure we put a link out to it there. But I can attest to that. They are information processing targets, and they help a great deal between training sessions where you can't get to a force on force training. It's worth a damn, and there are very few of those, by the way. So
yeah, cool. Any more questions?
I'm gonna give you guys like a minute more, and then we're gonna call it because it's 7 minutes past the hour. I'm seeing thank yous in the chat. Al, another great class.
Thank you very much.
I might actually recommend it. You know how there's a viewing order for the Star Wars movies where you're supposed to watch movies in a particular order? I might actually recommend people watch this one first and then do the introduction to defensive shooting class that you did, and then you've got sort of a cadence of, because this is really foundational, and I really do appreciate it. So thank you so much. Yep, lots of no questions, lots of thank yous. I'm going to go ahead and unmute everybody so they can say yay.
All right.
Yeah.
Everybody's unmuted.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, guys.
Thank you.
All right, and I will have this up on YouTube probably in about a half an hour.
Yeah, great job, Al.
Awesome. Thank you very much, everybody.
All right, we are off the air.
Remember,